Hey folks, I know I am just an ordinary guy telling stories, but please leave a like and subscribe before we start. Let's enjoy in today's stories. Before I dive into today's stories, I want to say disclaimer. The content presented in the disclaimer video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I bought the tracker after a bad winter when I promised myself I'd be less lazy. It was small, a matte band that fit snug against my wrist like a second pulse. It counted steps, recorded sleep cycles, mapped runs. For a while, it was useful. It chastised me for sedentary weekends, congratulated me when I did the stupid little victory lap of 3 miles. It was, in short, a harmless gadget that hummed quietly with data and light. Then it started to lie. The first morning I noticed was Tuesday. I blinked awake at 7:30, reached for my phone, and the morning summary popped up. 2.9 miles, 2:05 a.m. Outdoor walk. My brow creased. I live alone in a second-floor apartment with a deadbolt, a heavy wooden door, and the kind of old windows that don't open without a fight. I keep my keys on the hook by the door. The only way out at night was through that door, through the hallway, and down the stairs past flaky mailboxes and the humming boiler. I have no memory of leaving. I have no memory of anything between midnight and morning. I laughed it off, blamed a glitch. Technology is temperamental. The tracker had a map, a shaky breadcrumb trail that showed where my phantom self had walked down my street, past the mini-mart with the flickering neon, across the little bridge, past the bakery that opens too early, and then, curiously, into the oldest part of the town cemetery. That evening, I called my friend Jess, the one who taught me how to be suspicious without being paranoid. I told her over beer and microwave nachos. She listened, then said, sleepwalking. Lots of people do it. Get a camera, lock your door, or sleep with the band off. Simple solutions. The problem with simple solutions is that they often assume reality is still linear. I started with the low-effort options. I slept without the band. The morning readout told me I had slept fine. No movements, no night activity. I slept with the band on in the phone across the room. The readout said I left the map traced the identical path into the cemetery and stopped, said, at a small spur near Plot 47. Plot 47 showed, and my heart stopped in a way that is more a physical absence than a thump. A blue pin right at a grave with my full name engraved. Oh, grave with my name. I called the hardware store and bought a simple door alarm. One of those peel and stick sensors that shriek at any forced opening. I set my phone to record with its cheap selfie cam aimed at the bedroom catwalk so it could capture movement past the door. I placed a glass of water on the nightstand, something I've read somewhere as a trick to wake yourself. If you sleepwalk, the spill will startle you awake. I plastered extra locks and set traps of caution like a person trying not to be swallowed by a possibility that felt too big to pronounce. At 1:58 a.m., the house settled. The radiator sighed, and the building made its usual settling noises, tiny groans like a thing dreaming. I sat up, listening. 2:03. My phone buzzed. 2.1 miles outdoor walk. The alarm on the door stayed quiet. The cat, who sleeps on my feet, didn't bark. There was no scratching, no weight, no sound of a body crossing the hallway. My camera showed my empty bed. The glass of water still undisturbed, a round of reflected light on its surface. The tracker believed it had been walking, mapping coordinates onto a map as if it had a view of the world I did not possess. I watched the footage back in the trembling blue light of dawn. At 2:03, the video showed static, not the quick fuzz of a camera glitch, but a slow smear, like someone had dragged a damp hand across the lens for one frame when the smear thinned. There was a shadow at the threshold, an outline that followed the exact slope of my shoulder. The small, habitual bend of my left elbow where the band sat. It was a silhouette of me, but the angle was wrong. The shadow moved as if someone outside the door stood in the hall and tilted their head in a gesture I recognized from mirrors. The door did not open on the footage. The alarm never screamed. The tracker logged 13 minutes and 1.3 miles before it suggested I return to bed. And according to the footage, I simply resumed sleep. I began to sleep with lights on. The tracker kept walking. My neighbors complained about the bright hallway light at dawn. My friends started to take my messages seriously and then not seriously again. The way people do with stories that could be grief or could be nonsense. I made lists of rational things that might explain it. A faulty gyroscope, GPS drift, some app misreading my heart rate as movement, but the map remained too specific. It led, without fail, to the same part of the cemetery each night. A teen. Never went anywhere else. I drove to the cemetery in daylight because rational people go to places in daylight and take photographs and make notes and feel brave. Madness, I told myself, requires daylight reconnaissance. The cemetery had been here longer than the town had. The gate was iron and rusting. Paths split like veins between rows of stones. I walked with my shoes on gravel that sounded like dry rice. The wind smelled of damp leaves and the faint bleach of cut flowers. The grave that matched the tracker's location sat beneath a maple, its stone a pale rectangle with weathering grooves at the edges. My hands left print-shaped smudges on cool stone as if the act of touch could anchor me. There was my name carved in neat serif letters. First, middle, last. Below the name, there were no dates. It's just a smooth, almost unnatural blank. Someone had set a single white silk rose on the stone. It was the kind of rose funeral parlors sell by the dozen, eternally perfect, always a lie. There was a thin strip of plastic ribbon tied around the stem with nothing written on it. I stood there and the sun moved, pressed my palm to the stone, and it was colder than the air should have made it. It's like the kind of cold that knows the shape of a hand and remembers other hands. It's a prank, told myself, and kept saying it until my voice felt foreign. I set more traps. I left the bedroom door propped with a chair. I slept with the chain on. I asked Jess to stay for a night. She brought pizza and a cheap bottle of wine and her skeptical flashlight smile. We watched a movie, and I fell asleep on the couch like a man who has used up his fear for the day. Jess slept in my bed. At 1:45 a.m., the tracker recorded movement. At 2:10, it stopped at plot 47. At 2:21, it logged return. I woke to the soft nausea of having dreamt nothing and a ballooning dread in my chest. Keith, who's the kind of friend who will pull you out of a well if you yell long enough, did not. Remember leaving the bed. Her hair was mussed, her eyes puffy. The chair stayed propped, the chain locked. The camera on the hallway showed only the small, guilty sleep scrunch of a person who had moved in their sleep. The tracker, however, had recorded 2.6 miles outdoor and a stop at that same meaningless stone with my name. We drove to the police station in the afternoon with evidence printed in the cheap black and white of a home printer. A young officer pursed his lips and nodded and used the word medical and sleep study and consult. He said symptoms and professionals, and he wrote down my address as if he might visit later and hand me a pen. Close. The police could not do anything for what might be a malfunctioning device. The words unexplained movement sounded like a polite way of saying, this is above my shift. The sleep clinic was clinical in the way that hospitals are both helpful and apologetic about what the human body is willing to show. They fitted me with wires to trace brain waves, heart rate, oxygen. They placed cameras, infrared lenses that see in green and white to watch me from every angle. We'll keep you for one night, the technician said, offering a paper cup like a peace offering. We'll track everything. 2:02 a.m., the machines recorded me in the steady language of monitors. Delta waves, breathing slow and even. Limb movement non-existent. The cameras showed me sleeping, peaceful and ordinary. The tracker logged 2.9 miles in a route through streets, sidewalk, cemetery, plot 47, and home. When I watched the infrared footage back with the clinician, there was nothing. No motion in the frame. No leaving the bed. Yet the tracker had recorded each step. You weren't anywhere but here, the technician said, and he rubbed his forehead. If the tracker says otherwise, then he looked at the data printout and then at me. We can't account for that. Keys, bands, are devices. They're not infallible. The data, I knew, was infallible in the other sense. It did not lie about the coordinates it had recorded. It had some way of placing me in a place I could not reach. It remembered me where I had not been. The nights condensed into a calendar of dread. I began to dream of walking beneath fir trees, of a path lit by haloed street lamps and a scent like old soap. Each morning, the tracker's map sat blinking like a steadfast witness. Each morning, I woke with a brief, bright confusion that dissolved into the cold water of fear. The grave remained blank. The roster of tools I had stocked to defend myself grew absurd and inadequate. Cameras, chains, friends, clinics, alarms. The phenomenon did not care for bullet points. I thought of death in the way you think of a recurring bill, distant, inevitable, and then suddenly present in the mailbox. But death had not shown itself in a thunderclap. It showed itself where someone had taken the time to carve my name into stone and leave the dates blank, an invitation with space for ink, like an invitation awaiting an address. The crescent moon of the seventh night was thin and sharp. The tracker had, for the week, logged me arriving at the cemetery between 2 o'clock and 2:30 a.m. and staying 10 to 20 minutes. The stop was precise to the footpath edge at the side of the map that corresponded to the maple tree. Night. Did something irrational. I went into the cemetery earlier than the tracker ever recorded. I drove in at midnight and sat in my car with the heater off, the engine, a small animal idling, parked so I could see plot 47 and its shadow. Grass was chalk white. The air bit my cheek. I had a thermos of coffee that had gone cold and a camera that had a full battery dot. At 1:58 a.m., the world seemed to hold its breath. At 2:03, headlights appeared on the far road. Someone leaving, perhaps. A cemetery gate squeaked like a hinge. In a film, I saw a figure move along the path. It was a woman, slow and methodical. The hem of her coat stirred the tops of the grass. She was heading toward plot for 7. My first reaction was impossible Tom. It's a kind that is not peace, but a strange punctuation of panic. I had been waiting for this. I crept closer, camera up, breath fogging in the beam of my flashlight. The figure stopped at the stone, and I watched as she lifted a hand to the carving. In the pale silver light, she turned. It was me, not my reflection, in a puddle or a figure in a coat that resembled me. She had my cheekbones, the small moon of scar on my left eyebrow, the way my hair caught at an exact, annoying angle. She looked at me with the same annoyed expression I have in the mirror when my hair refuses to obey. She stood like a person who knows the measure of their own body. For a second, we were two things, one caught, one catching. I stepped out from behind a leaning yew, and she didn't startle. She did not turn in the way a person would if someone barked from the bushes. She turned as if she expected me to be there. Her eyes were pale and shallow, like washed cloth. For a brief second, the world gave me a gift of horror, so clean it felt sacred. She smiled. It was not a smile that reached her eyes. It was a small, private thing, a practiced smile, a smile one gives when addressing a known, polite audience. She laid the same white silk rose on the grave. Then she touched the stone with the tips of 2 fingers and whispered a sound like a moth trapped in tissue. I couldn't hear the syllables. I saw the lock of her throat move. God. The air in my chest became a small, panicked drum. I moved forward and she turned to walk away. Her gait had the tiny imbalance I had from an old sprain. She left footprints in the grass that matched mine. We led away from the stone and then stopped at the path, but they did not continue to the gate. I called out, "Who are you?" My voice was a paper thing in that place. She looked back, but the eyes, when they found me, were empty as a room that had once had a life and now stored silence. She lifted a hand and pointed. Her finger tapped the stone where the date should be. When I stepped closer, heart a rat in a cage, the weather-worn face was warm as if someone had breathed there. The sandstone held a suggestion of something lately scraped, faint lines where words might be. The silk rose was gone. I looked up and the woman had already slid between the trees, a shadow that conflated with the dark. I chased her until my legs burned and the world narrowed to breath and leaf. I found only the iron gate and the road and a cigarette butt that was still warm. Not hers, not mine. I was alone. I drove home with headlights stabbing pools of black as if the dark concaved around each tree. The tracker that night logged the walk. It had me there at the stone, but the footage I had captured with my camera, the footage with my breath fogging the lens, showed a shape moving between trees and then a trick of light. Nothing. The next day, I returned to the grave in daylight. This time, the stone had changed. Someone had carved a date there. It was not in the future. It was today's date, not in the poetic sense of a prophecy, but as if someone had scheduled punctuation into my life. The letters were crisp and clean, as if whoever had carved it had done it with a steady hand and a knowledge of tools. I called and called. I left messages. A funny, clinical thing happened. The more I shouted into the world, the smaller I felt. The internet returned guesses and horror forums returned sympathy and hospital lines returned the patient script of disbelief. The world is vast and some things slip through the cracks like small, unhappy fish. That night, I resolved to stay awake. I took no sedative. I drank coffee until my hands shook. The room held its usual sounds, a radiator, the distant hum of the city, the faucet occasionally clicking. At 2:04 a.m., I felt a presence in the room like a pressure shift. The band hummed softly on my wrist. My phone buzzed. Activity recorded. I rose without thinking and leaned toward the door. The chain was intact. The alarm did not sound. My bedroom felt too small, as if the house held its breath with me. I turned toward the mirror on the wall. In its pewtered glass, my reflection blinked, and then, like a film strip, skipping the face that looked back at me, moved not as a reflection, but like a primary actor. The eyes slid, the lips parted, and my reflection smiled the same small, secret smile I'd seen in the cemetery. My reflection lifted a hand, and for a beat of time, my hand on the mirror did not follow. It remained heavy and real at my side. The reflected hand tapped the glass from the other side, exactly over the stone where the date had been carved. I do not remember how I stopped the next thing from happening. I remembered the taste of a word in my throat that could have been a prayer or a command. I remember the sound, like the rustle of a page being turned, the mirror fogged with breath that was not mine, and then cleared. When I looked down, the band on my wrist glowed with a single pulsing light, the kind it makes when it wants to be noticed. The tracker that morning would register nothing more than a restless night, and yet, on the map, a new pin would appear, marked at 2:04 a.m., returned home. I have stopped trying to prove this in the way people prove things, with charts and with logic, and with friends who read facts like a comfortable dinner. Proof is messy. The machine insists on a trail I cannot touch. The camera insists on frames that hold more absence than presence. My name sits on a stone where a date has been carved in a hand that is not mine, in such neatness that it calls attention to itself like an unlit sign. Last night, the tracker recorded its familiar walk. I didn't leave the bed. The chain was on, and the alarm stayed quiet. But when morning came, I opened the app, and the map blinked, and for the first time, there was a small new tab linked to the cemetery pin. I clicked it with a hand that shook so hard the phone blurred. The app opened. To a thumbnail, a small, grainy, still taken from some camera, the image drawn in the app's automatic Lightroom. In the picture, by the headstone, a figure me was standing. Her eyes were not empty this time. Her face was turned upwards, mouth open as if speaking, and the angle captured the inside of the palm she held outward, tucked in her palm. Like a small, insignificant thing was a plastic tag. On it, in tiny, typed letters, was my name and a number, the exact number the tracker assigns to my device. My phone buzzed with another notification, a calendar event created by an unknown process titled, "See You Tonight." It had no invitee, no attached message, only the time, 2:13 a.m. I cannot say what will happen. I cannot say in the language of certainty whether I will be something else tomorrow, a carved thing in a cemetery with dates that march like a clock. I can say that there is a hole in my life now the size of a map pin. And every night, the band rubs against my skin and records. My absence, like a witness that sometimes speaks more truth than the body that carries it. If you manage to stay with me to the end of this, if you watched the map draw the route and felt the cold press of the grave under your palm through the words, then do me a favor. Leave a like, subscribe, and if you dare, turn on notifications. Scription isn't just a word, it's a promise. If I disappear from videos and comments, you'll know where my tracker has been. And if you ever find a white silk rose left on your doorstep with a tiny plastic tag in its stem, check the name.